Welcome to another episode of Sync Riffs. I'm Charles from Blue Buddha, where each week with our guests, we riff about syncs and the state of the music biz. Have very special guests in the studio today, music supervisor Melany Mitchell. How's it going, Melany?
Hey, Charles, thank you for having me.
No, great to have you, and thanks so much for joining us. And a short little intro on Melany, who is a LA-based music supervisor by way of North Carolina. And she's also a proud member of the Guild of Music Supervisors. And you would have known her, some of her work on film and television shows like Fantasy Island, I'm Totally Fine, Block Party, and also God Save the Queens, to name a few. And setting the table up, Melany, for all our guests in the past, would love to, hear about your journey into music supervision and how you first broke into the biz.
You got it. I had an interesting path. When I first moved to LA in my early 20s, I was trying to figure out how to be a music supervisor, but in those days, it was not super clear how one would do that. So I worked in development. I worked for producers. I did a lot of different things just trying to make money and was just barely getting by. And someone suggested that in the meantime, I go be a stand-in for film and TV. And so I uh, did that for a while, for about a year. I was on a different show or movie every day. I would work on, Charmed one day and then Alias and then 24. And I would just bounce around wherever they needed a blonde girl for that day. Um, and eventually I worked on one of the last few episodes of The West Wing. And despite the fact that that crew had worked together for a really long time, they were super welcoming to me and very friendly. And so when Aaron Sorkin did his next show, Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, they took me along as part of the team. So it was very lucky. I had like a steady gig for about 9 months, the same place every day. Um, but I got to be super close with the whole crew. And so we had a lot of musical guests on that one. And one day when it may have been Sting was performing or Trombone Shorty, I can't remember, but Anne Klein, who was the music supervisor, showed up on set and all of the crew knew her. And so they said, now's your chance. If you want to go talk to her, you should go up and make your case. And so I just went up and asked her any tips she could provide. And her suggestion was to go take a course on music supervision at UCLA taught by Jen Piken. So I went and I was super interested. Jen was super cool. And I realized that there was no way I could not go to this job every day that I had finally landed, that I was making money and able to pay my bills and I had health insurance. So I said, you know what, I'm going to wait maybe a year or two and then I'll circle back to this. But Studio 60 got canceled after one season. And I went back to Jen over the summer and said, hey, can I just like intern for you for free? She said yes. She was awesome. And then we worked together for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, and funny enough, I actually, before I became a sync agent, I took that same class.
Yeah.
And
Almost everyone took it, I think. I still work with so many people who took that class.
yeah, a wealth of info. And no, that's so cool. So then from there, so correct, you music soup a little bit of everything: film, television, video games as well, or
Not a video game per se. I did do a YouTube series on video games. So I've touched I feel like almost a little bit of everything. Right now I'm working on a podcast. It's my first podcast. So I'm
cool.
trying to pivot a little bit in
Mhm.
these crazy times and try something new. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. Now, so that said, sort of, before our podcast started in sort of a pre-chat, as far as when you were navigating music supervision, obviously you had Jen as leading the path and as a great mentor-mentee relationship and learning from her. But as far as the biggest challenge or hurdle learning to become a music supervisor, what would you say is it was really something that you had never was it in your wheelhouse per se?
I think what's awesome about music supervision is there's something new you learn every day. There's a new
Mhm.
challenge every day, or at least every few days. I feel like it's very common for me to text another supervisor, no matter who it might be, at least once or twice a week and say, "Hey, I'm running into this. Have you dealt with this?" And chances
Mm.
are maybe they have. And same goes, they might reach out to me and say the same thing. So I think there's unlimited challenges, and even
Mhm.
working on this podcast, when they told me I got the job, they said, "Are you excited?" And I said, "Of course, I'm excited because I get to learn something new, but I'm also scared. I don't know how to maybe solve all of these problems, but I'm going to turn to a trusted team of people to help me through it." And I think what's awesome about the world of music supervision is we're always ready to help each other.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And that ties in because I had a chat with another music soup and she was, really highlighting clearance, publishing. You got to know that inside out because the majority of what you guys do is that. And then obviously balanced with the creative side and then all the relationships you manage between sync agents, labels, publishers, and the whole nine. But
Yeah.
how do you guys? Yeah, that's a lot to manage in a given day. I can only imagine between hundreds of thousands of emails you're getting at a given time. You got to listen to music and then spotting sessions. So is that something you just learned as you went, as far as being able to the workflow of things?
Yeah, I think what's awesome is working on film and TV both at the same time. It's such a different process that you learn what's good and bad about both of those processes and how to navigate those. TV is really tight deadlines, really high stress. Movies can take like 9 months, and that's a
Mhm.
different type of stress, because maybe you cleared a song months ago, but the process is dragging out and you've got to go back and re-clear the song, hopefully for the same amount of money.
Mm.
A challenge that we face is that we're very often on a project before it's even shot. We read the script and we're working from that stage, but then over time we're the last department to kind of work. So if
Mm.
something goes wrong with another department, the music budget gets cut little by little. So, you find out they had to do reshoots. So that takes money out of your budget. They had to pay a little more for VFX. That might take a little bit out
Mm.
of your budget. So you're watching it get chopped, and that's something that's tough.
So that's a great point, Melanie, because I would imagine, correct? Let's say prior to a budget getting cut or sliced on, are there cases where, say, you gave a quote to a major label or a publisher before that happened? Are there cases where you have to go back and say, "Hey, the quote was this, and now we want it. Can you do it at this reduced rate?"
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
that's one way it could go. And
Mhm.
then they can say yes or no. And then the other
Mm.
direction it could go is you've had a conversation from the get-go with directors and producers, and you're kind of set on these major label songs. And then you don't have anywhere close to that amount of money anymore. And then we go out to indies, or, our trusted contacts who have really good stuff for a fraction of the cost.
Mhm.
And our challenge at that point just becomes getting everybody on board with the fact that it wasn't what they initially really wanted, but could be
Mm.
just as awesome.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So, like you said, and I think, speaking with Jen the other day, she said similarly, you know, having alternate tracks as a backup.
Yeah. Yeah. We always
Mm.
have them, even if they never get shared with anyone. We always have them.
Right. I can imagine the plan A, B, C, D eventuality.
Yes. Pivoting
Um,
is important.
yeah. So then something, as you were addressing that, came into my mind. I don't know if this would ever happen. Are there ever cases where you issue the quote and from the time of the quote being issued and then the confirm that the writer or the publishing changes and then you find out at the last minute?
Yes. Yes, it does. And
Oh,
there have been some clearances that we've gotten on some movies that I've been shocked to get from huge artists. And I'm
mm,
basically every morning I wake up and I will the movie to just be finished so that we can lock in that rate and not have to
yeah,
worry about that.
nice.
But things happen. There was a film that I had that went to Sundance, and
Mhm.
the day that it was premiering at Sundance, one of the publishers called me and said, um, "Hey, this just changed hands." And of course, we had not finished all of the paperwork yet because we had the festival rights, but we hadn't locked in everything. And so
Mm,
I'm not sure I've ever felt that much stress about anything. It got worked out, but
wow.
talk about cutting it close.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's, and I'm sure that's where the world of, Jen and your other colleagues have always echoed. That's sort of the lane Blue Buddha that we occupy. One stop rep, drama free. And then,
Yes.
to really cover the bases. And then I think it's a good point to share and see if you agree is, I'll tell artists, hey, at a minimum, we need to be working with them for at least a year because I'll have artists who were like, "Oh, 6 months, you guys can get me a sync." I said it takes longer than that sometimes, and then they
Sure.
want to they want to jump ship to another sync agent, and then I'm like, "Well, be patient." And so the longer we have to pitch their music and just play the odds, the better.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes they maybe don't, artists don't understand that it's not as simple as just sending a song and I
Mm.
love it because chances are I do love it, but then it makes it through a lot of other levels of people approving. And so you might not get this one, but you might get one, like you said, a year from now. So you got to just hang on for the right thing.
100%. No, thanks for clarifying that. And correct, just like bands that I'll really love and curate playlists. Similar, if you get, oh, here's Blue Buddha's dance electronic, you're like, Charles, I know this is his wheelhouse. You'll save those tracks, and if it comes up again, then you have
Yeah.
your go-to list from us.
Yeah, for sure. If I hear something that I
Mhm.
love, even if it
Mhm.
doesn't make it, it goes into a folder and it will get repitched for sure.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, it's to your point, every podcast that we have with the music supervisor, it's one extra puzzle piece of, like you said, it's a myriad of things are always changing. And now with, artificial intelligence, AI, and music, those are interesting things. But to thread the needle onto a topic that is currently happening with the writer's strike. If you want to spend a couple minutes, I know, correct, the music supervisor were trying to form a union as well.
We were. Like you said, things are kind of crazy right now, so I'm not sure how quickly we're going to get traction on it. I think we were making some good progress. I think it may, unfortunately, kind of get pushed to the back burner in the midst of all of these more high profile fights. But it's important, we watch music supervisors watch all of this every day where people are they're fighting for more, and that's understandable. But we don't even have a union, so we don't have the basics that everyone else in the industry has. I mean, you're talking about your music editors have health insurance, they have a pension and retirement, they get paid in a timely fashion, craft services, like lots of people who contribute to these projects. We have nothing. So,
Mm.
in the midst of these kind of crazy times, we're paying our own health insurance, which, as you know, is extremely pricey.
Mhm.
We are trying to save for our own retirement, which, of course, we're blowing through it to try to live through some kind of unstable times. And, if we don't get paid sometimes for months after a project ends, where some people get paid weekly and they're able to, not worry about that. We sometimes have to chase down money months after we're done working. So we're
Mm.
just fighting for the basic stuff.
Mhm.
And I hope we can get back to that soon.
So, correct, is there a petition or what are things that, if folks want to help support the cause that they can they can do.
There was a petition. I'm not sure if
Mhm.
that's still going around. I would have to double check on that. But I mean, I think one of the biggest things is people who work in the entertainment industry, if they can just talk about how important music is to their projects and kind of stand up for us and,
Mhm.
let people know that this is what's going on, that would be awesome.
100%. So yeah, well, definitely we can post um, that information, the links, and you know, as you continue your path as a music supervisor, um, new challenges as far as so correct. Once the streaming platforms happened, that actually shrunk the number of episodes from traditional formats.
Yeah, that's one thing that happened.
Mhm.
But I also think what's been awesome about streaming is that there have been more projects than ever. So
Mm.
you see a lot of music supervisors working in the past few years more than they've been able to, uh, you know, 4 or 5 projects at a time, which is amazing.
Mhm.
Um, and lots of different types of projects have been available, like, more documentaries, more animated series.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting thing because yeah, there's less episodes, but I feel like I've seen a lot more work coming
Mm.
in.
Mm. Mhm.
It may be just more shows.
Yeah, for sure. But now with the streamers though, is the deadline is it tighter, quick, shorter, so to speak, as far compared to traditional television?
In my experience, it's been about the same. I mean, they
Okay.
still want a pretty quick turnaround,
Mm.
but
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
pretty close to TV. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Now, I've posed this question to past guests as far as, obviously independent artists, the benefit of going with a sync agent, we're vetted, we have a conduit into the studios and relationship with supervisors. Now, for those independent artists, I know every supervisor is different. Sometimes they want to keep their music fresh and they don't mind if someone pitches directly to you. What's kind of your advice there, or it just kind of depends on a case by case?
No, I have a very strong stance on this. I do know that people feel differently about it. I'm pretty risk averse, so I will
Mm,
only use music that's pitched to me by a third party sync agent.
mhm,
I work on a lot of indies and they don't
mm,
want to take a risk of maybe someone forgot to say they had a sample or forgot to say they had a co-writer. And so we don't want the onus of that to fall on us on the production.
mm,
So I always appreciate it when people reach out to me directly. But I just won't do it. I would rather know someone trusted like Blue Buddha is pitching me and that they've done the research on this music and they're going to stand behind it.
mhm. Yes, no, and thanks for that vote of confidence. And I think that's a big point, as far as having worked with yourself or Jen for years, where, it's that team effort, like you said, it where as, times of the essence, budgets of the essence, and, no collateral damage or surprises. And that's why we do what we do and we're thorough. And, yeah, like you said, there's so many moving parts, Melanie. And I think, that's part of the reason we wanted to start the podcast, because there's a lot of information out there which can make it like, hey, sync is the gold mine. You can make it's so relatively simple, but there's a lot of details. And I think, to thread that needle, since it is June Pride Month, last month was AAPI month, so we did some panels. So continuing that thread of inclusivity and representation, as far as the LGBT community, um, opportunities, if you want to speak to in front of the camera and behind the camera, whether it's showrunners, music supervisors, what's kind of what are we seeing out there?
I mean, representation is so important. I mean, there's no way around that. As far as in front of the camera, I'm a prime example of that. I grew up, I didn't see anyone who was gay on TV who I necessarily identified with. I
Mm,
think at the time it was a lot of stereotypes. And so because I didn't fit those stereotypes, I was just kind of like, okay, well, I guess that's not me. So I had conflicting feelings about where I kind of fit in. It took a long time to figure it out, but
Mhm.
once representation got better and more people, more LGBT, well, in my case, I can only speak to the lesbian part of it, but having people create things that were authentic to them made a big difference to be able to see that kind of stuff. So I think it's important to have it on screen so that
Mm.
people everywhere in the world can see it, but that comes from people behind the camera being able to put their voices on screen and show that representation in a really authentic way. I mean, with that said, it sucks that it even has to be a question that sometimes shows and movies say, well, we need a certain percentage of LGBT people because I, for one, would never want to get hired because I'm gay. I would want to get hired because I do a really good job. And at
Right.
the same time, it's a double-edged sword because I think we have to show the rest of the world that we can do, you know, a great job. People are being discriminated against around the country and not getting work because of who they are. And I think we're very lucky to work in an industry where people don't care and it doesn't matter and it shouldn't matter. If I go in and try to get a job, they shouldn't be thinking about who I'm dating. They should be
Mhm.
looking at my resume. So
Yeah.
it's a nuanced situation, I think. I think it's really important. And at the same time, I can't wait until it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, no, that's some great points there, and to thread the needle. Similarly, we Ruby Ibarra, Filipino American, on our API panel said the same thing. Is we shouldn't just look at like, hey, we need to fill these quotas, but
Yeah.
the right person for the right job, so to speak. And then Rudy Chung from Netflix was talking about leaning into our diversity because as far as creative opportunities, when showrunners or productions are writing or producing films about the Asian community or LGBT community, they want the authenticity. So there's an
Yeah.
opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's true of any community. I mean, I just
Mm.
worked on a show for FreeForm called Everything's Gonna Be Okay, and it was about autistic teens and children. And it was crazy to work on that because people would say, "I've never seen myself or my child or my sister. I've never seen anyone like her on TV." And so it is obviously
Mm.
a really big deal. So I hope that that continues, and I hope that um, everything that's going on in the industry now doesn't push out people who have diverse
Mhm.
perspectives.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I totally agree there, Melanie, where it's similarly, through whatever mechanism, it's like the Hallmark card. It's like, 1 month out of the year shouldn't just focus
Right.
on the our communities, but
Right.
it should be all the time. So that's always something we always bring up. But no, that's interesting. So that production, were there any opportunities to have songs from autistic artists?
Yeah, I mean, we went out and looked at a lot of a lot of different artists for that one. I had a lot of fun doing that, and also our showrunner was not only autistic but also gay. So, we went after a lot of LGBT
Mhm,
artists,
mhm,
and tried to make it very representative of a lot of voices. It was cool. It
mhm.
lasted 2 seasons. I wish it had gone longer, but hope to keep working on projects like that get those voices out there.
Yeah, amazing, amazing work. No, that's very cool. And to thread and tie that needle, Melanie, because there was a panel that I was on and I overheard correct an opportunity when independent artists submit their music to an agent or to a supervisor in the metadata, just if they're by POC or AAPI or LGBTQ, because if you're looking for an artist within those communities, that's great to know. Otherwise, you wouldn't know otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another reason that sync agents are great also because,
Mm.
if I need a pitch, I will reach out to people I trust and say, "Hey, who do you have who's in this community? Who do you have,
Mm.
who is from this area?" I just
Mhm.
did a movie, like you mentioned, Block Party, which was based in Detroit, and they wanted local Detroit artists. And so, it was
Mm.
cool to reach out to a local sync up there and say, what do you have? This is their time to shine. We want this to be authentic. So that's when sync agents are super helpful for us as well. You know what you have and you
Mm-hmm.
can tell us quickly.
Yes, 100%. Now, and there's a nuance there I wanted to clarify and verify is, say you have a Detroit native, they were born in Detroit, they lived there for 20, 30 years, but now they're in LA. So if I send it to you and I say they're Detroit and you look them up, you're like, oh, they're in LA now, Charles. Which is it? So just be transparent and say, hey, this is the deal, and then you could decide.
I think so. Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, I don't think that would matter that much. If it's a great song, it's a great song. And sometimes some of the songs that we use, they didn't end up all being from Detroit, but we used a lot.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Still got to be the right song.
Best song wins.
Yep.
That needs to be, yeah, 100%. But no, thanks for clarifying that, because yeah, it's interesting, because also, just to thread the needle, Melanie, um, correct, from time to time your approach. Do you send out briefs to your short list if you're in a jam, or it just kind of depends? What's your approach with
You
briefs?
know, I like to see what's new out there all the time. So I don't mind going out with a fresh pitch for everything that I work on. I
Mm,
never mind listening to new music. I love to see what you have that's new, but I also want to double check because obviously artists do kind of move around, or maybe their publishing has changed. And so I want to make sure that whatever you're pitching me is still one stop,
mhm,
or easy clear, and that we can clear it pretty quickly and without any questions. So I don't mind going out with a fresh pitch. I know not everyone does that, but I try to make
mhm.
time to do that.
Okay, cool. And then, correct to say, because my approach, and the mentor that I learned from, where it's, you know, if I get a pitch or a brief and if I can't nail it, I'm not going to waste your time, Melanie. I'll say, hey, get me next
Thank you.
time.
Yeah, I wish more people kind of got that. I sometimes have people like yourself who say, you know what, I just don't have anything for this one. I'm like, great. You're not going to get every one of them. Or they'll say, I have this one and it's probably not what you're looking for, but I'm going to send it your way. I'll listen to it. Sometimes it changes how I've thought about something and I say, oh, actually,
Mm,
this is awesome.
mhm, mhm.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, some people will send me like 20 songs that aren't right. And then I don't generally go back to them as quickly or as often.
Yes. And that's a good, just to clarify, correct. So obviously, if I'm representing, say, Natalie Walker, and because I've seen it where, people will say, oh, I love this artist so much, so I'm going to send you a bunch of, you don't want to get multiple tracks from the same artist, if obviously if they don't fit,
Right.
but less is more.
Yeah, I mean, I try to definitely go out with a very detailed brief. Sometimes I miss some points and I'll have a sync agent email me back and say, "Hey, did you want male or female vocals? You didn't specify. Did you want this to sound
Mm,
vintage or do you want it to sound modern? You didn't tell me." So,
mm,
over time I've tried to get better about being really detailed in my briefs, but I think it helps you guys to come back to me with stuff that will work and give you a better shot also.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's you know correct, and obviously if it's not stated, we can't assume one way or the other. We have to
Right.
go back for more info.
Right. And I'm fine with that. I will answer questions all day long because I want you to nail it just as much as you want to nail it.
Yeah, yeah, no, great insights, and thank you for that. So as far as what's on the horizon for, you know, having worked both on the film and TV side of things, like you said, TV's quicker, film can drag out. Do you have a preference between the two, or obviously it just depends what's on your plate at the time?
I think it just depends on what's on my plate. There was a time when I said I only wanted to do films from that point on because it's just a different lifestyle. You can work on maybe 10 movies at once very comfortably. But with a
Mm-hmm.
TV show, you feel like that's kind of an all-encompassing, especially with a big network show like like Fantasy Island or like Everything's Gonna Be Okay. You feel like that's kind of your world, and then maybe you have some movies going on too. Um, but the flip side of that is TV is a regular paycheck, and it's a longer project, and it's different. My philosophy is just to say yes to everything, because you never know who you're going to meet, who's going to
Mhm.
take you on to their next 10 projects. You never
Mhm.
know what you'll learn. So as long as you're able to say yes to something, and as long as it's not something that you're going to suffer,
Mhm.
I think you try it and see what happens.
Yeah, that's great advice because it's sort of that was as a good segue as far as advice for folks who, whether they're looking to, let's say they want to go into music supervision, bar none, what would one piece of advice would you give them?
It goes hand in hand with that. I mean, say yes. I
Mm.
talk to so many up and coming, aspiring music supervisors, and they say they have these big dreams, which is awesome, but they say, I can't wait to become a music supervisor and only work on, projects that speak to me, or projects that I identify with. And so my response to them is, well, you still have to pay your bills in the meantime. And so, you're not always going to get to work on every single thing that you want, but you don't know what's going to come out of the other things that you say yes to. I
Mhm.
mean, at the same time that I was working on Fantasy Island, I was doing indie films. Sometimes someone will reach out to me with they're doing a student film for USC or UCLA, and they'll be bold and they're like, I can't believe I'm asking you this, but would you music supervise my film? I don't have any money. And
Mhm.
depending on the project and depending on how cool the person is, I'll say yes, because you don't know
Mhm.
who that person is going to be. And,
Yeah.
one student that I said yes to, I was like, okay, this is kind of a cool little indie film that he's doing for school, and he sold it to HBO.
Wow.
You just don't know. And now he calls me for all of his projects. And it's like, if you have the time and you have the energy, it's worth it's worth trying to see, what's out there. Make those connections.
100% connections, pr- press the flesh, go to conferences, be seen, and
Yeah,
yeah, it's that's a great story because like you said, you never know, or if you shut that door and then the next thing you're like, oh my god, they just got picked up by Netflix.
yeah. Or that person becomes, the next Spielberg, and you're like, "Oh,
Right.
I should have responded to his email." But, someone
Hmm.
gave me a shot when I didn't know anything and I didn't know anybody. So if I'm able to do that, if I'm working on enough other things that I can pay my bills and I'm able to take
Hmm.
on somebody's student film, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Similarly, I was just curious, mentor mentee programs or mentorship programs in the music supervision space, are you involved in any, or informally or formally?
Informally, I try to help wherever I can. So if it's, I just spoke on a panel at the Grammy Museum, which was for young female composers, songwriters, producers, aspiring music supervisors. That was really cool. We got to not only speak to them, but then after we got to chat with all of them, and I feel like I learned just as much from them as
Mhm.
they probably learned from the panelists. I try to meet with people, be it, people who want to music supervise or songwriters. Sometimes songwriters want advice about how do I get my music into a TV show, and I'm happy
Mhm.
to help with that too whenever I can. And then I'm part of a website called Sidetime, sidetime.com. And people can pay a per minute fee to talk to me about whatever and ask questions about whatever. And then I donate all of the proceeds to the ASPCA. So
Oh,
giving back in a different way.
amazing. Very cool. Well, when we post this podcast, I'll definitely we'll post the links up to that. That's
Okay.
I think I heard about them. That's very cool.
Yeah. It's a neat
Yeah.
idea. And I've made some friends through it too, singer songwriters who are like,
Mhm.
chat with me, and then their syncs take off, and it's exciting to see them succeed too.
Yeah, I think we, as a sync agent, as a seller of music, if you will, and then the supervisor, you're the buyer of music, where what we share in common is knowing, when we have a positive impact on an independent artist in their career and their trajectory, and to look back like, yeah, I helped place them or you place them. And then they're like, now they're signed to a label and they're touring.
Yeah.
I got to see them.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, I love it when people are really hungry to start syncing their music and then their
Mhm.
music is good and it just takes off for them. They just needed someone to tell them who to contact or where to go, and
Yeah.
it's really cool. I love that.
I think, yeah, every day it's that's what drives us, finding
Yeah,
that next big piece of music. So that
yeah,
said, we like to ask all of our guests, at the moment, what's on repeat in your Spotify or your playlist? What new music is in your queue that you're like, oh my god, you gotta check this band out?
yeah. Jenny Lewis has a new album coming out. She's always one of my faves. I think she's such an amazing songwriter and such a gorgeous voice. So I've been listening to that new album a lot. Brandy Clark, who I think is just such a fantastic kind of folk and country uh, songwriter. She's a great storyteller. Her new album is amazing, and she also weirdly did the music for the Broadway musical Shucked. So
Uh,
that's kind of cool to see country music kind of taking off on Broadway. But I don't know. I'll admit, because of all of the stress of the strike time, I'm feeling a little nostalgic. So I just bought Judy Garland live at Carnegie Hall on vinyl, which I did not own before. And I think that's just going to be going around and around while I wait for everything to clear up a little bit.
Very cool, very cool. And correct, from past posts, or I think you had done a podcast, Broadway, whenever in New York, that's your great pastime of going seeing
Yeah.
Broadway shows.
Yeah. I mean, music tells the best stories. So for me, I think, I used to love watching movie musicals and Broadway musicals, and music really tells those stories so well. So I love going to Broadway, and I go maybe twice a year and just kind of binge everything new. So yeah,
That is too cool. God, it takes me back to remember when, during the pandemic and everything shut down, including, the
yeah,
performances and when it reopened. But yeah, that said, because I'm just curious, is there, with a live performance like that, so is there a music supervisor to clear, obviously?
yeah, there is. And I know some of them. It's a very different job from what I understand. Um, you're working on something that you kind of have to clear it for a certain amount of time, but it could be indefinite. And then
Mm,
it depends on the project, like what kind of music, and is it recognizable, and is it original? I think their duties, kind of like ours, just kind of depend on what the project calls for. But yeah, um,
mhm,
I do think a lot of times they might get to be a little bit more creative as far as working with the pit musicians and whatnot. But
mm.
similar but different.
Hmm. Do you think that would, yeah, like you said, if a door opened there, you'd be like, hey, that'd be the best of both
Yeah,
worlds.
it would be. I mean, like I said, I would say yes to anything as long as, it makes sense for me. It would be a chance to learn something new. I do have a couple of
Yeah.
movies that I've worked on in the past that they're currently trying to turn into Broadway musicals. So
Mm.
I'm chatting with them about that, but I don't know in what capacity I'll be able to move forward with them, but it would be cool to see something like that happen.
Yeah. So we'll put that in the universe.
Right. That's a good idea. I'm going to put it on my vision board. That's a good idea.
Absolutely. No, it was cool. And just to thread the needle on side closing, I think it's been 5 or 6 months now, but when Bono put out his autobiography or his memoir, Surrender, and then he did the CD, and then he was playing at the Beacon in New York, and where he was playing some of his tracks, and then he was doing excerpts from his book. But it's just it's so cool to see, again, like you said, um, artists that can reinvent and continue to stay relevant in such an impacted music space. And not to mention, one last question is, TikTok. I mean, correct. Sometimes showrunners will find music through TikTok, and then you'll have to go and clear those tracks.
Yeah, it makes me a little nervous. I never know who those people are or who represents them. So like I said, I tend to tell people, let's be risk averse and let's make sure that they're
Mm,
repped by someone who's responsible so that we aren't put in any kind of legal trouble. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of new artists are making it big that way, which is really cool. I mean, everyone's trying to pivot right now. And like you said with Bono, I mean, I did miss that show, but I saw Springsteen on Broadway and it was very similar, just trying to like reach a different group of people and present music in a new way. And it was incredible to see it performed in that space and in that way.
mm, mhm. Yeah, that's, I think, similarly, whatever might play out, everyone's talking about, and then we'll save that for another chat on a podcast, but with art, AI, and music, and not to mention all the ramifications, chat GBT with everything that we do. But yeah, it's things are moving at warp light speed, but in the meantime, we continue the path. And no, it was a great chat. Really grateful insights, and I really appreciate your time and joining us today, Melanie.
Yeah, it's nice to see you, Charles. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you taking the time.
No, always, always, and we'll continue the chat both online and offline because we're going to post the links we spoke about. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Smash that like button, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the other side. Namaste.
Go.